When we use tools, it's common sense that the way we hold the tool will affect how the tool operates. With a hammer, it makes a difference if I hold it here or if I hold it down here. It can actually feel more secure if we're not very familiar or comfortable with hammers to hold it closer to the head, and yet the hammer is designed and we get a much better job if we learn to hold it down at the base. It's no different with the tools that we use when we draw. Although for most of us, we actually have a problem with our drawing tools before we even start, and that's that we've already learnt to use them, but for a different task. And the particular way we've learnt to use them for this task is not the same way we would use those same tools for our drawing. We've learnt to write. When we write, we need highly controlled movements in a very precise way. For most of us, this results in a tight grip, fingers low down on the end, a visual focus on the pen tip, pivoting on the base of our hand, and consistent pressure and speed. And I could add holding the pen at the same angle all the time. The problem when we go to draw is that none of these ways of holding our pen or our pencil are particularly helpful when we draw. In fact, many of them are the exact opposite of what really we want to be doing. Let me outline better ways of thinking about holding our pen or our pencil when we draw compared to when we write. And can I suggest, as I do, make a mental note of any of these that perhaps you need to pay attention to when you draw, and possibly experiment with some changes to how you're currently holding and using your pen. Firstly, we need to resist the urge to clench tight with our fingers. Instead, we need to hold our pen as loosely as we can, but still retain control over what it does. And I need to move my fingers back from the very end. As well as giving me a more helpful ability to control my pen, it also actually lets me see more of the paper, and that can be helpful in putting marks and joining marks up. When I write, I often end up using the tips of my fingers to move my pen in the small controlled way I need to create the letters. And sometimes for more detailed marks, this can be still helpful to do. But generally, I want to be creating my lines and my marks on the paper, holding further back from the end and not moving my fingers to create the shape and direction of the lines, but by moving my whole arm. In fact, rather than moving my pen with my fingers, I use my fingers to lock the pen in to the position I'm going to hold it in, and I do all that moving with as much of my arm as possible. And particularly when drawing longer lines, instead of focusing on my pen tip, I focus on where I want my line to end up. If I want it to end here, I don't look here and I don't follow along here, because if I do that, I can end up way off target. Instead, I keep focused on where I want my line to end. I focus on where I want my line to finish, and I work at bringing my whole arm to that place. Another difference between holding a pen for writing and for drawing is that when we write, generally it's a slower movement. Because we're doing a lot of things intensely in a small area, we stay in the same place for longer. And particularly because we're using the fingertips, we often end up resting on the lower part of the hand. Even in writing, that can end up making it harder for us to get a nice even form to our letters and our words, because we simply run out of space pulling our fingers back before we have to move our hand again and reposition it. Instead of allowing myself to rest on any part of my hand or my wrist, instead of leaning down and resting on my hand, I want to keep my hand as off the paper as I can. I find just touching it very lightly so that I can glide over it in a very smooth way is the most helpful thing to do. In order to do this, I have to take the weight of my hand and the pen using my arm, using in fact my upper biceps. Now I can quite easily make marks as long and as lightly and as quickly as I need to create the effect with the ink that I want for my drawing. By not resting on our hand on the paper, this also lets us vary our speed very easily. As well as varying the speed, we can vary the angle. The sort of line I get if I hold the pen directly onto the paper or at a very shallow angle is very different than if I hold the pen at a much more oblique angle. The more variety we can get in the sorts of marks that we put on the paper, visually, the more interesting our drawing is going to look, but also the more possibilities there are for capturing effects that can translate our subject onto the paper in more engaging ways. Because creating varied marks and combining them in different ways and interesting ways to create the overall scene that we're wanting to present in some way is fundamentally what drawing is so often about. However we hold our pen, we want to be able to keep it loose and flexible to create varied marks that open up possibilities of what we can do. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. I hope you found these thoughts helpful, and if perhaps you recognize now that you're a bit of a clencher down the end of the pen, or the pencil for that matter, and that perhaps your drawing style is being impacted, and that perhaps the way you learnt to write is still impacting your drawing style and your drawing results in a way that you'd like to change. So why not be more conscious of how we hold our pens and see this as a particular skill area that we actually can choose to work on. But in the end, however you hold your pen, whatever lines or marks you make with it, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.